Hello and welcome to the training video of Knowing the Brunei Darussalam Accounting Standards for BDAS 5, Leases. My name is Fatin from Dynamic Technologies and I will be your vocal guide for today. In this video, I will brief you through the definition of each module under BDAS 5, and by the end of this training, you are expected to understand the background and the different kind of entries that are categorized under BDAS 5. Now let's get started. Lease is classified under Finance Lease and Operating Lease. Finance lease is defined as lease that transfers all the risks and rewards incidental to ownership of an asset. The lessee will obtain ownership by the end of the lease term. On the other hand, operating lease is lease in which all risks and rewards related to asset ownership remain with the lessor for the lease asset. In this lease, the asset is returned by the lessee after using it for lease term agreed upon. The lessee is only entitled for the use of the lease asset. To further understand each module, let's go through one scenario sample entry under Finance Lease, which is BDAS 5.1, Record Finance Lease as Owner. It is defined as financial lease that transfers all the risks and rewards incidental to ownership of an asset. Let's assume the following scenario. Yo-Yo Car is a car rental company. Yo-Yo Car provides a Toyota Vios to Mango Limited as a finance lease. The finance lease has 5 years term in which Mango Limited has to make $6,000 payment to Yo-Yo Car at the end of each year. The total finance lease payment is $30,000 together with the rate of interest implicit in the lease is 5%. Following accounting entry for this scenario is such that debit the asset which is categorized under PPE, Property, Plant and Equipment, with the amount of $30,000 and credit cash or bank with the same amount. This is a journal entry transaction. Now let's go to the journal entry page in Accounting Plus to see how you can draft out this entry accordingly. A complete draft of the journal entry transaction will look like this in Accounting Plus. Do note the journal ID generated by the system for future reference. BDAS 5.2 is to record finance lease income as owner, which is defined as finance leases as owner should be recognized as assets in their balance sheet. Let's use the sample scenario from previous BDAS 5.1, but the difference with this scenario is that we are recording the income as owner under finance lease, and the rate of interest implicit in the lease is increased to 25%. Therefore, we can extract the following accounting entries, which is debit the cash received for $6,000, whereas credit will be the lease income for $4,500 and finance income with $1,500. This is a customer invoice transaction. Now let's see how these entries are entered in Accounting Plus. Click on the module Finance Lease Income as Owner under BDAS 5. A list view of customer invoice transactions are displayed. Click the Create button on the top left side of the page and a new invoice draft page is displayed. You may fill in the required fields accordingly as per the given scenario. Further help can be found here on the top left side of the page. A completed draft of the customer invoice transaction will look like this. Do note the invoice ID for future reference. Under Finance Lease is BDAS 5.3 to record finance lease as occupant. It is defined as the occupant will obtain ownership by the end of the lease term. Now let's take a look at the scenario from the books of lessee's point of view. Mango Limited is a trading company. Mango Limited runs a Nissan Almera as a finance lease. The finance lease 5 years term in which Mango Limited has to make $8,000 payment to Yo-Yo Car at the end of each year. The total finance lease payment is $40,000 together with the rate of interest implicit in the lease is 5%. From here, we can extract that the debit will be asset with amount $40,000, whereas credit the finance lease liability with the same amount. This is a journal entry transaction. Now let's see the draft entry in Accounting Plus. A completed draft of the journal entry scenario previously discussed will look like this. Do note the journal ID for future reference. Moving on to the next scenario is to record finance lease expense as occupant. It is defined as finance leases as occupant should recognize as expenses in their income statement. The scenario sample will be the same as BDAS 5.3, however, in this scenario we will take into account the interest expense and that the rate of interest implicit in the lease is increased to 25%. Therefore, the accounting entries will be debit both finance lease liability for $6,000 and interest expense for $2,000. Credit, on the other hand, is the cash for $8,000. From here, we can extract that this is a vendor bills transaction. In Accounting Plus, the transaction will be recorded as such. Do note the vendor ID for future reference. Operating lease, on the other hand, is BDAS 5.5 to record operating lease as owner, which is defined as operating lease in which all risks and rewards related to asset ownership remain with the owner for the lease asset. The sample scenario is the following. Miko Computer rents 100 pieces of desktop computer to Yayasan School as an operating lease. Lease payment at $30,000 annually. From here, we can extract that the accounting entries are such that the debit is cash $30,000, whereas credit is rental income with the same amount. This is the customer invoice transaction. Now let's try to see how the entries are being drafted out in Accounting Plus. Do note the invoice ID for future reference. Moving on to the next scenario is to record operating lease expense as occupant. It is defined as operating lease should be recognized as an expense in the income statement. The scenario sample will be the same as BDAS 5.5, which is to record operating lease as owner. However, in this scenario, we will take into account the operating lease expense. Therefore, the accounting entries will be debit for $30,000 and credit the cash for the same amount. From here, we can extract that this is a vendor bill transaction. Now let's try to see how the entries are being drafted out in Accounting Plus. A completed draft of the vendor bill transaction will look like this. Do note the vendor ID for future reference. Further help can be found here on the top left side of the page. If you need more help, guidance, or a demo on how to get started, we will be more than pleased to assist you. You may contact us with the following details as shown. Thank you for watching the course video for BDAS 5 Leases.